Hi guys, I want to have a conversation about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and that is a conversation about ADHD or ADD and its similarities or comorbidity with childhood trauma. ADHD is highly overdiagnosed. And one of the things that we need to remember is that the symptoms of ADHD and trauma are pretty much the same all the way across the board. The problem is that a lot of people aren't screening for trauma. You know, your normal physician is not necessarily going to be doing the mental health checks that are going to see what's actually there. And also it depends on who you're talking to on what the definition of trauma is. And there may be just these categories that people say, look, this has to have happened to you in order for you to qualify for it. What I want to do is I want to kind of use that word trauma in a really loose form. We want to make sure that we're understanding that we're either in a state of flow where it takes no effort for us to be us, or there's been some form of fight, flight, freeze, or disconnection where the autonomic nervous system has upregulated into some defense pattern in order to protect us. And there's a lot of different variations of what this looks like. You know, so if you've been through something where you've been scared by something, a trauma, and now you're hypervigilant, that makes sense. You're now paying attention, right? So the same type of things can be happening with an individual that's being diagnosed with ADHD is they're hyper attentive. They're paying attention to a lot of things all at once. So their body is very upregulated. So their autonomic nervous system may, again, be in some version of tension, anxiety, something that's pointing as a symptom that there is some form of trauma that hasn't downregulated, hasn't completed its cycle yet, right? So there's two major reasons for anxiety. One is, and I know there's a whole list of DSM ways to define and label. I'm not a huge fan of labels. There's two major reasons. One is you're actually in danger. That's a good signal. You want to pay attention to that. The other reason for anxiety is simply that there's been something in the past, some conditioning or an actual trauma that has upregulated fight, flight, freeze, or disconnection, and it hasn't completed its cycle, and anxiety is the symptom that exists. So when we're having anxiety, we're worried about something, and a lot of that may be subconscious based off of what we've been conditioned with, because the body keeps score, and the body is going to react to things sometimes even before the language of the mind will as well. So when we're talking about the definition of trauma, though, again, I use it very loosely. We're talking about everything that upregulates the body, from 0 to 10 on a scale, from emotional conditioning to trauma lower T to trauma big T. It's the same mechanisms, although there's varying aspects of those mechanisms. It's just differing levels of degree. So it can be anything from, I don't know, I didn't get what I wanted on my 7-year birthday party to, you know, oh, I was raped, or I saw my best friend die in my arms in war in Afghanistan, right? It's the same mechanisms, and we haven't completed those cycles yet. Anxiety and hypervigilance, not being able to pay attention, is an upregulated system is what we're talking about. So you have an upregulated system. What do ADD and ADHD meds do? Well, most of them are stimulants. And so it basically stimulates the brain to speed up. Now we're already paying attention to a bunch of other stuff. So we're basically going to take an upregulated body, and now we're going to upregulate the mind also. The best example that I could give of this is you have two jumbo jet airliners that are traveling at, 30,000 feet at, 200 miles per hour, whatever speed that they fly at. And so it seems very calm, but there's so much that's actually going on underneath the surface. So we want to use that metaphor, and instead of bringing that mind up to be stimulated in such a way that it can handle all of this upregulation, what if we didn't stimulate and we looked at what the stimulation was and we taught the child how to complete those cycles of trauma, which we're actually designed to do. We just have to use this imaginative mind to get this imaginative mind out of the way so that the body can actually do what it normally does. And so this is where there's a lot of tools now that we have, whether it's introducing somebody to mindfulness, which is bringing them out of one particular brain activity known as the default mode network, which we use for a lot of creativity and abstract things, which is great, but also having access to that experiential mode network, which is here, now, and not necessarily being lost in an abstract story about reality, but actually being here in reality. And what we know in neurology is that the brain does what the brain expects to do. So the neural system, the autonomic nervous system, all of that is going to do what it's trained, what it's conditioned to do. When we go back and we look at trauma, there's some really interesting patterns that we can look at in a kind of a family constellation aspect, to where we now know that, for example, children of Holocaust survivors are prone to PTSD and anxiety. Now, why is that exactly? I mean, they didn't go through the same traumas. They didn't live through the Holocaust, right? So the reason is because they were modeled the triggers of those traumas. So even though they didn't go through the traumas, this is a way a lot of phobias and other aspects of trauma can literally be inherited through modeling generation to generation. This is something all of us should really know about, because there's so many patterns of what this then points to in our relationships and our behavior, in the way that we, show up in life. I mean, if you look at these patterns of what's modeled to us when we're dominantly in, theta brain activity between the ages of 2 and 7, and then you look at what people really, really struggle with in their lives, you will see these amazing correlations. Now, correlation is not causation, true, but it sure is a very, very fruitful area for research and for, detective work to see what needs to be processed. The other thing there is, when we say the word trauma, a lot of times people are like, well, my kid hasn't been through trauma. And I think that when we quantify things, that we don't understand that it's very subjective and open to interpretation. And I love in Francine Shapiro's book, she talks about, let's say that you've got a 3-year-old boy and mom's doing laundry or something. And I'm kind of paraphrasing the story. Mom's doing laundry and the boy's kicking around a ball and he kicks it towards the stairs. And she says, don't you go after that ball, because she doesn't want him to what? Fall, right? Okay, but he's 3 years old. He really likes playing with that ball. So what does he do? Of course, he goes after the ball and she catches him before he falls. And then she gives him a little, spank on the butt, sends him on his way. Very loving household, very minor kind of thing. But that little 3-year-old mind just internalized in his subconscious felt sense identity that he's establishing during this period of time. If I go after something that I want, I'll be punished. Okay, well, now generalize that to, a 10-year-old, or maybe worse, a 50-year-old man. And then you can see the pattern of how that butterfly can become a kind of a hurricane. But it's a theta brain, childhood, established felt sense identity. And as we grow up into more alpha beta type of brain activity, we can't even rationalize why we feel this way. And so there begins to be a difference between what we think and what we feel, with the reality that what we end up thinking really has more to do with what we feel. And what we feel is mostly autonomic nervous system conditioned behavioral pattern. And it's not like 20 to 80% subconscious to conscious. It's like 1 to 1 million. Neurology is an amazing science to look at. So we want to be able to go, okay, wait a minute, before I give my kids drugs, that we don't really even have enough research on what the long-term effects of that are. We're just now beginning to look at some of that, but we can see a lot of parallels and a lot of comorbidities. We can see how stimulants in childhood frequently lead to an expansive use of drugs as they go into because we're not actually treating the cause, we're only treating the symptom. And when the child calms down, according to what they experience, even though it's a really fat illusion, or what we experience because the child is just not, all over the place, well, then everything seems fine, but much of the time it's anything but. And I want to bring this attention to I want to bring this particular aspect to people's attention. At least 2/3 of what we are calling childhood ADHD is not ADHD. It's unresolved, unprocessed trauma. And the thing that most people need to keep hearing about that, we are designed to heal trauma as long as we can get these amazing imaginations working for us, not against us, and these amazing advanced memories. Again, we have to process how that's showing up so that we can do what a dog can do that doesn't have a memory of more than 15, 20 seconds. It's generally always happy because it's already downregulated, unless fear or anxiety has just been conditioned and repeated into its conditioning in some way. So I want to bring that out. If you're a parent, if you're looking at this ADHD versus childhood trauma thing, I want to make sure you have this information. There's a book by Tom Hartman that basically is called The Edison Gene and the Gift of the Hunter Child. It's a wonderful book to just take a look at things from diet to how you're working with things. There's so many different techniques now that he doesn't really know back then when he wrote that book, but now working with experts in EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EFT, emotional freedom technique, a different type of trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, although the more somatic, I think, is really going to work a lot, with children. Like you can teach a child to tap, to work on using acupressure to interrupt the signal from the brain to where they're feeling upregulated in fight, flight, freeze, or disconnection in some way. And beginning to develop a vocabulary, a language to be able to describe internal states in a way that most people that are only in their thought process aren't doing. And there's a whole sensation-based realm of paying attention that many people are just truly missing out on, that we want to introduce and help them conditioned to be a part of the richness of being alive and what they're able to feel in their now moments as well. So I hope this has been instructional, and I really encourage you to reach out, do your own research and find out, but don't just go get a drug to treat a symptom when there might actually be a cause that's there. And make sure you do the research and find the right person for you to help you with that with your child, because chances are a lot of that is coming from modeling of our own issues. What? Yep, yeah, we're absolutely responsible for that. Sorry, parents. The research on a parent practicing mindfulness and the effect of modeling and what that has on our children, phenomenal. So if you don't have a practice of presence, look at these videos that we're doing here, especially ones on practicing presence. Learn more about the science and why you should be doing that in some way. All right. God bless. Take care.